There's a joke back in 2008 is like you could tell who was Chinese if they were wearing Louis Vuitton from head to toe, right? And then I think after Xi Jinping's kind of like crackdown on like corruption and on like public displays of very large amounts of wealth, then I think the sentiment also shifted away from like wearing very obvious displays of Western luxury to more domestic, affordable luxury goods.
Welcome to Brave. Learn from Southeast Asia's best tech leaders. Build the future, learn from our past, and stay human in between. No BS on success. I'm Jeremy Au, venture capitalist, Sierra founder, Harvard MBA, science fiction nerd, and dad of 2 daughters. Every week, we debate startup news, interview changemakers, answer listener questions, and share personal insights. Join our movement of over 40,000 members and get transcripts, resources, and community at www.bravesea.com. Stay well and stay brave.
Hello, half a year has gone.
Both of us are traveling and working really hard. So,
I got platinum for 3 hotel groups in the first half a year.
what? That's so nice. So, like, was it a nice hotel?
I mean, it's always nice, but I mean, it shows the intensity.
Yeah.
I was telling a joke to a friend that the other day when I went back to my apartment, I was trying to slot a card into the...
So, where were you traveling to?
So China and Vietnam.
Yeah. What was the kind of like situation there?
So a number of things. We mainly look at the whole sort of e-commerce and cross-border trade ecosystem. So China is usually to Hangzhou and the surrounding cities, and where there are lots of like traders, so there are lots of manufacturers, e-commerce platforms. To Vietnam is largely to Ho Chi Minh City and the surrounding, where there's lots of trade going on, as you can see. And of course, this half year has been coupled with lots of surprises.
So let's talk about it, right? Because I think the last episode it was about kind of like the Liberation Day, all the tariffs, and sort of the unpacking a lot of it. And I think there were 2 big shifts that happened since then. One, of course, is there was the negotiation between Trump and China on the framework. So I think there's a lot more certainty as of now. And obviously, I think recently, just a few days ago, Trump announced a resolution to his negotiation with Vietnam as well. So let's dive deeper into both of these. So let's maybe look at them as a totality instead of looking at them one by one, because this is
kind of related, right?
Related, like what do they call it? What, big brother, little brother, right?
It's more nuanced than that. I mean, the flags are similar. I mean, it's run by the Communist Party, but there are lots of nuances.
Yeah, so lots of nuances, but I think, from a Southeast Asia angle, there's some similarity. So I think maybe for my summary, I think at a high level for the China framework, I think it was very much driven by a sensation that there was initial pause of tariffs, and eventually there's a negotiation. Big component of that was the rare earths materials was a big sticking point. And of course, continues to be a big push on like Chinese IP and Chinese semiconductor chips. And on the Vietnam deal that was recently announced, a big point was really about transshipment of Chinese goods and what is country origin, i.e. which are Chinese products. Anyway, I'm just kind of curious how you see both deals from your perspective.
I think somebody sort of, found a quote of Deng Xiaoping like many years ago saying that rare earth is strategic, we must control it, like said in like 1980s or something. So I do think that from a strategic planning point of view, I think at least the leadership in China has been looking at all these potential choke points for themselves as well as for the global economy. So I do think that lots of planning has gone into it. So that led to what was happening today, right? Where they had something which they can see that, okay, in a trade war, I have this card which I can use in extreme circumstances, which I think they have used that. I think it's showing some results, right? Because you read the news, like auto CEOs went to Trump to say that, hey, we can't run our production in America without rare earth. So that led to negotiations, and it's kind of curious, right? I mean, it's been a few weeks after they've concluded the negotiations, and nobody has announced the results.
Yeah.
But you see some movements, right? Some of the permits being granted, and some of the sort of restrictions from the U.S. side being relaxed. I suspect they have reached some kind of agreement.
Yeah.
But they have probably both concluded that it was not a good idea to announce that agreement at this during that time.
Yeah. So I think one of the tricky parts is it feels like the Chinese and American negotiating teams kind of want to make a deal, but it does feel like the public optics of it is very much like America has to show that they are strong in terms of negotiating with China, and I feel like China doesn't want to lose face.
Yeah, that's right.
So
that's probably the reason why they didn't announce the results of the negotiation. I think for Vietnam it's probably a different story. The country is extremely export led and FDI led. And I think when that 46% was announced, it was a shock to everyone. And everyone's scrambling to say, okay, what can we do about it?
Right.
Versus if you look at China, at least the businessman, the manufacturing process, my hometown, they've been like going from shock after shock since 2018. I think psychologically it's a bit different.
Yeah.
And the General Secretary To Lam of Vietnam was
Yeah.
the first to reach out to Trump to
Yeah.
have a call. And he offered zero tariff for US goods to enter Vietnam.
Yeah.
So that's indeed what was agreed this time. It was announced by Trump and To Lam. So if you look at the current deal that they have concluded, of course, I mean, it's good for Trump, right? It was like the first deal announced. And I'm not sure, I mean, how many deals will be announced between now and the end of the extension period, which is in a few days. In that deal, the goods from Vietnam will be paying 20% tariff to the US. But those who are considered transshipment from a third country, I mean, which usually I think means China, will be paying 40%.
Yeah.
And the US goods will enter Vietnam tax-free. I think it's always interesting to put a bit of number into the perspective, right? The Vietnamese export to the US last year was about 140 billion USD, and the US export to Vietnam is like 12 billion. It doesn't matter much if Vietnam offers it like a tariff-free to the US.
Right.
But of course, if Vietnam loses or has to pay like significant tariff for their export to the US, and that's hurting the economy a lot more.
So I think there are two parts to it. So one was, I agree that there's a contrast in the China and Vietnam approach.
Yeah.
And I think it's a function, like you said, first of all, size. China is bigger. China has rare earths, and China has been dealing with effectively some kind of tariff structure since the first Trump administration. I think in terms of negotiating posture, it's like totally different, right? So China, whenever Trump raised the tariff, China also raised it, right? 100 plus together.
Yeah.
Tariffs, and then now they've gone back down together. So I think it was very symmetrical, and I think it was very clear that it was like a tit for tat, or like game theory, right? It's called tit for tat. It's supposed to be like, whatever you do, I do exactly the same, just to show you that, you know. And then if we come down, we also go down the same way, which is exactly how it's played out.
But you need bargaining chips to be able to do that.
Yeah, you need bargaining chips, exactly, because you can't fold if you don't have it. Whereas Vietnam, I think, played it correctly as well, which is that as a smaller country that's much more export reliant, they just went for the fold, you know, in a sense, where they straight away surrendered on the tariff component by being the first and fastest, right? And so they never raised tariffs. They kept everything backdoor, diplomatic, and they offered zero tariffs straight away. Unlike, say, EU or the UK that have some like longer negotiation and so forth. So very different strategies that I think have worked out for both countries, actually. I don't know. I haven't checked my X Twitter account last night, so we may be wrong. Things have changed.
Since January, I started checking Truth Social because you get it the first time.
Yeah, exactly, right? Like, why wait for it to be reposted on Twitter? You should get it faster than Truth Social. I think one interesting dynamic is talking actually about, was this a good deal for America? I mean, obviously, from Trump's perspective, this is obviously success for the China side, and this is success for the Vietnam side in terms of their trade approach. So I think that's a victory by the U.S. government administration. But I'm just kind of curious, like, do you feel like U.S. got what they wanted, or that at the end of the day, this negotiations was beneficial to America?
I do think that there is some issue with the trade. I mean, for the last few years, because I mean honestly, looking at I've been to lots of manufacturing plants in China, and I've been to like similar facilities in the rest of Southeast Asia, and in my last trip to Vietnam, I spoke with quite a number of, medium-sized business bosses. I mean, those who drive a Porsche. And I just feel that I should sense a kind of anxiety from lots of manufacturing bosses from Vietnam. They said that, okay, there's no way we can compete against the Chinese in terms of efficiency, in terms of scale, because they have such a large domestic market. And whatever they do overseas, especially in areas where not so much sort of localized customization of products need to be done, they're just going to be more cost efficient than us. So what should we do about it? So there's this fundamental issue in that. And the question is that when the US government sees it, there's this narrative that, okay, we should not compete on like low cost manufacturing, etc. But I think if you look at manufacturing in China, it's happening like with all the different sectors, advanced manufacturing, they just drove the aircraft carrier into Hong Kong, right? I mean, if you look at the scale of things, obviously you feel that you want to do something about it. But the question is how and what's the right thing, and there's no perfect solution. So how do you rebalance trade or rebalance the dynamics? I think it's tough to say that what is right, what is wrong. I think last time we discussed about, I mean, everything's in Trump's head. But I think one addition to that is that there will be lots of people around him who try to influence him in different ways, which will make it, I think, even harder to guess what's going in his head. So from the US point of view, I do think that at least, I mean, Trump will score like a first win. I said, hey, I've struck a deal and they're paying the tariffs, even though the consumers in the US are paying the tariffs, because most of the exported stuff from Vietnam will be consumer goods. And one component of the deal is that the transshipment will pay 40% tax. I've spoken with some friends in Vietnam. I don't know they have idea how to sort of properly sort of identify that. And it's probably less of a technical issue rather than a political issue, how to identify what as transshipment. They do have standards of what would be sort of recognized as a made in Vietnam. But the question is that, so for this 40% tax, is who recognizes that?
Yeah.
Is it the Vietnamese authorities or US authorities or negotiation or whatever? So it's complicated.
So let's talk about why it's complicated, because I think transshipment has something that we've always kind of known at a high level, but never really gotten a little bit more to detail. So let's go into that. So from my perspective, the American perspective is I have a high tariff. I have a high tariff on China, and Vietnam has a lower tariff. Okay. So I'm worried that Chinese goods will be moved into Vietnam through logistics and then come to America and basically bypass the higher tariff I have on Chinese goods. And so therefore, I want to make sure that there is a higher tariff on Chinese goods that are transshipped via Vietnam. So, okay, conceptually, I think that makes sense to me, because basically what you're saying is, I don't want you to smuggle and get through the tariff.
So I set some rule and you don't find loopholes to bypass this rule, right?
Correct. And this is actually a real problem, because I think I was reading an analysis by economists and basically I was saying that the tariffs from Trump administration, the first administration, about the headline figure, of course, is X, but because of the very loose enforcement of these transshipment, etc., the tariff rate was effectively half of the headline tariff rate, because everybody's not paying the tariff, right? The taxation. So, okay, so I think that conceptually makes sense, but I think the part that's getting tricky, and let's talk about it, is what is a Chinese good versus a Vietnamese good, right? So obviously, if you had a farm and you raise a durian tree on a Vietnamese soil, and then you send it to America, then obviously there's a Vietnamese product. And obviously, if you have a Chinese phone that's 100% assembled and manufactured in China, and then goes through Vietnam to the port, only through the logistics, and then that's the Chinese good. But I think the in-between is tricky, right? Which is, let's say you have a factory in Vietnam that is assembling phones, but 80% of the components come from Chinese factory. But then obviously there's a labor component that you're also adding on top of that, which is quite significant. So how would you transship, or how would you label that?
I have not gone into the details about, I mean, what is recognized as a made in Vietnam or sort of official certification, whatever, but I do have two friends who told me that for both their sectors, I'm not sure whether that's across the board or just for their sort of categories of goods specifically, if they have 40% value add in Vietnam, they can consider their products like made in Vietnam. And then here comes the question. I mean, how do you recognize this like 40%, right? So if 80% of the value of the components came from China, what's the value added? I mean, of course, the cost is one thing, and the second is that, I mean, how do you declare your books to customs or whatever? There are lots of different accounting treatments to that. So I think it's a bit hard I think it's a bit hard to police. Second thing, which people look at all these Chinese goods, they say that it's because of like, enterprise in China, small companies who are setting up factories in Vietnam, etc. But if you look at the structure of Vietnam's exports to the US, I mean, Samsung alone is like 40%. And Samsung is a large actor, and it has the power to direct its suppliers to move their production or move their sort of sourcing, etc. Last year, I spoke with the GM for Vietnam of a large Chinese electrical appliance company. And he was telling me that he was very grateful for Samsung. I said, why? Samsung forced so many of our suppliers to move their production to Vietnam. It made life easier for us. Previously, they had to source from China either. But the problem is that these are still Chinese manufacturers. And when you go a little bit upstream, there's still lots of things being produced in China. So how to decipher this and how to break this apart and how to set policies with so much complexity, I'm not sure how much of that is a technical issue versus a political issue. That's what we discussed about.
Yeah. I think I actually like what you just said, which is identification is that there's actually a nexus between obviously Vietnamese labor and Vietnamese kind of like plants, right? But there's also another component with Chinese components, these factory bosses, or I'll say supply chain suppliers. And then there's actually a big chunk of like Samsung or Japanese I don't know what you call it, master or anchor
Yeah.
kind of like factories or products who are actually coordinating the whole show, right? I think when we look at the kind of like 20% tariff and 40% transshipment tariff on Vietnam, it's not necessarily applying to Vietnamese companies. It's also applying to Samsung products that are being run out of Vietnam as well.
But to be very honest, I'm not sure how much of that is true. Like, Vietnamese companies funded by the Vietnamese actually running operations in Vietnam, and of course for large companies, a lobby, right? So I don't know what's really going on behind the scene.
I think it was interesting because I was watching The Daily Show by Jon Stewart, and there was a journalist called Patrick McGee, and he was complaining about Apple. He was basically saying that Apple invested billions of dollars into China's economy, training up factories, training up suppliers. And I think both of them were arguing that this basically destroyed American jobs and, kind of like train a new generation of Chinese electrical engineers and so forth. So I thought it was just interesting because I think historically there's a lot of criticism of that, obviously, from the Republican side. But this is the first time kind of seeing that criticism in the mainstream Democrat side as well. So I'm just kind of curious how you think about that.
Do I think about Democrats?
I don't think you're voting, so I
They
don't
do
think
a better job.
But I think there's this new emerging criticism of Apple. Because I think previously, if you go back to like even to 1 year ago, like not everybody liked Apple, right? And everybody was thankful. Like everybody wanted iPhone, and everybody was thankful for everybody to have an iPhone, because with iPhone you could actually I don't know, use apps, use AI apps, you can use your software as a service apps. Like I don't think anybody's ever complained about a cheaper iPhone.
It's not gone cheaper, but
It's not cheap as Android for sure. I think an Apple iPhone has still better value for money over time.
this kind of issues get politicized, and the truth probably doesn't matter anymore, right? And when things are not going well, people find things to blame. It's always easier to find something to blame than try to explain to people what actually it is. So the perspective of the manufacturing jobs from the US, I've heard lots of like narratives and lots of podcasts, lots of shows and stuff. I think what I liked the most was so there's this podcast by the US journalist Barry Weiss, I think Honestly or something. And once just a few months ago, she interviewed Niall Ferguson, the British historian. And Niall Ferguson was saying that the root cause of the issue in the US is that education has not caught up with post sort of manufacturing. So basically, you are left with a lot of people whose education level can only suit that kind of manufacturing. But as the industry moves on, as the whole sort of economy moves on, they're left behind. And that leads to lots of grievances and stuff. He was drawing parallel to what happened in Scotland. Talk about like post-manufacturing, so deindustrialization. So the place where I am from, somewhere in Scotland, and I saw that since I was born, like many years ago. And he doesn't see any way to go back to the sort of glorious old age. People need to sort of invest in their education to move up to actually tap into sort of new value creation. But the problem is that for the existing generation, it's tough.
Actually, I think there's a good point, because I think I was watching this anecdote, and I think there was a debate between, I think, Obama and the Apple kind of.
That was Obama when Obama was still president?
Yeah, I think there's an argument about, I think Obama wanted jobs from Apple to be, in America. I think what the anecdote was that he asked that, and then Apple was like, hey, we're looking for hundreds of thousands of engineers. They don't exist in America. And then, I think the story of the anecdote basically goes both ways, right? One is because the American government doesn't have enough electrical engineers, therefore Apple could not do the factories because they have electrical engineers, process engineers, and so forth. So they fly their designers and their, folks to to China to build those factories. Or the other story is that America should have forced Apple to build those factories, and by building those factories, it would have forced Apple to train those engineers in America. Yeah. So I think that's the anecdote kind of goes both ways, right? So
the question goes, right? I mean, if you want something to take off, and you need all the pieces, right?
Right.
You need all the pieces, and who's going to pay for everything? So the narrative, the Apple says that, China has it, which means the Chinese government has already trained enough engineers or built enough engineering faculties that could constantly train out engineers. So the government or the society is shouldering this cost, and Apple is tapping into it. If Apple were to do it in the US, building factories, training engineers, it has to shoulder the cost on its own.
Yeah.
So of course, I mean, for restaurant business decision, if there are no sort of rules or regulations, and you will naturally gravitate towards the low cost solution, and that's natural, right? And so if the U.S. government in the very beginning said, "Hey, can't go to China, you have to train engineers here," then Apple will be left with no choice, and then there will probably not be such a big debate now.
Yeah. So I think the trade-off that was happened, right, which is if America had forced Apple to not build factories in China, then the next question would be, Apple probably would build factories elsewhere in the world. They could build it in India or Vietnam, as an example, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So unless America kind of like 10 years ago said Apple can only build factories in America.
Yeah, but 10 years ago, 15 years ago, the problem is that at that time, globalization was remote, right?
Yeah.
So consumers were saying that, oh yeah, so amazing that they move the factories there and we have cheap goods.
Yeah, Apple stock value went up like crazy because from a shareholder perspective, which was primarily US asset owners, were basically saying, we like the increasing efficiency, the return on investment.
Consumers like cheap.
Consumers get to buy more Apple stuff, and Apple's revenue stream, a big chunk of it comes from services. And the services can only happen when there's a lot of people using the devices who are cheap. You make money on Apple TV, Apple Music, Apple iCloud storage, digital services, and App Store. So
like 15 years ago, it was politically correct to talk about globalization. At least like you will not have such a backlash because now people have seen the consequences, and many people have to shoulder this consequence themselves.
Yeah, I guess in a multiverse, if somebody had forced like American factories can only build in America, I think first of all, Apple will be a smaller company because its phones will be more expensive. I think, yes, there will be more engineers in America because they'll be forced to train engineers.
You solve this
set up the vocational. But I think what will happen is that Android will have won. So because Android will continue working at the Chinese and so forth. So in order for that to happen, you can't only say Apple can only build in America. You also have a mandate that Android phones in America, Google, can only be built in America as well. In which case, Google will also be a smaller company.
So the whole pie of the economy will be smaller than what we have today.
Apple and Google stock will both be down because if you only force Apple to build in America, obviously, Google go bonkers.
And Google is also an American company.
And it's also another company. And then the American shareholders and a lot of retirees invested in Google stock, right? So, and every Android phone is training their Google AI models today that only exist. American AI models, all that training data comes from American Apple iPhones and Android phones, right? So I think the tricky part is I think we can make a point of view about Apple, but I find that one of the tricky parts is that people don't think about the full other scenario, right? Okay, you're telling us that Apple should have only built in American factories, but then what's the full impact of that?
Well, the problem is that we try to run a narrative with the public. It's hard to teach people the full picture because, I mean, try to explain that, it will already take like, I don't know, a few hours. I actually learned this from, I've read lots of books about how Mao Zedong, the Communist Party leader, led the revolution in China. And a lot of that is that, okay, we're the righteous and these landowners are evil. And of course, there are lots of landowners who are benevolent towards the peasants, but it doesn't matter, right? Because your objective is to win the revolution, and it's much easier to find someone to blame than trying to explain to people what it actually is.
So I think this journalist was quite interesting. And I think I suspect it'll be actually quite influential because the subtitle is like how Apple was captured by China, right? So I was like, this is gonna be a viral hook, I think, for both the left and the right. And I think what's interesting is that I think we've also seen a lot of Chinese brands learn from Apple and other American consumer brands. So I think there's been a kind of an interesting part because I remember like, oh my God, 20 years ago, obviously the Chinese brands were always seen as,
There were no Chinese brands, there were Chinese products.
There's a good tagline. There was no Chinese brands in 2008, only Chinese products. So I mean, but I think there's a crux of it, right? It was like, and everything was really about, cheap. In fact, there was only just starting to be a crackdown on Chinese fakes because at the time, I don't even remember, there was all these counterfeit markets where all the brands were all being clone like crazy, and that got cleaned up right before the Summer Olympics. The
conflict is still there, but they take different forms and attack different audiences because I think the urban middle class of Chinese consumers have grown out of that. But there's still a large percentage of the society in China as well as in the West who value counterfeit cheap products.
You can get a kind of like a Louis Vuitton bag for $1,000 or $100.
I actually went to a market, and so somebody's guiding me there, and I said, oh yeah, so it's all domestic brands. There. No, you can still buy the sort of counterfeit international brands. Then she went to talk to someone, and someone started showing me the things they do. I said, wow, okay. I mean, I wouldn't be able to tell whether it's fake or not.
Yeah. And I think the problem has been because it's taken a few forms, right? One is that specialized counterfeit factories that counterfeit products. Secondly, I think the factory is a subcontractor or supplier of that good, but they just do a production overrun to just, so they just produce an extra 10% more product and then they sell it on the side.
They're much more cautious now, I would imagine, right? Because the brands are taking stricter sort of enforcement and stuff. But when you look at the thing is people talk about like low quality goods and stuff. I remember when I was in primary school back in China, people around me, the choice is between this nothing versus something, and the quality was not a big concern. When the economy was first started to sort of lift off, don't really have that much means to produce good quality stuff. Anything that works is good for you. Right. But as the economy grew, and there will be certain segment of customers who moved beyond that. Right. And that's like after 2008, after all this like 4 trillion incentives, whatever, the economy was going up, then people started buying sort of branded goods. And post-pandemic, the whole sort of narrative or the whole sentiment shifted. Yeah. I was just talking to a friend last week. She works for a large sort of oil company. And she was telling me that before the pandemic, when she goes to a client meeting, every client say, Miss so and so, I can see that your income is now rising because you're carrying the same bag as you did half a year ago.
That's horrible. Wow, that is so direct.
Brutal. But post-pandemic, and people, I think somehow, I mean, something that the pandemic or the policy around the pandemic shifted people's psychology. People say, so all this is good quality, and if you're paying for like luxury brand, you're paying stupid tax. Because you can get similar quality at a much lower price point. I think that reflects a couple of things. I mean, first is the psychology of the consumers, of the sort of middle class and above consumers has shifted. And second is, I think the domestic brands have caught up in quality.
I think maybe one thing I'll add as well is that I think also the Chinese government philosophy on like ostentatious luxury symbols. Because I mean, there's a joke back in 2008 is like you could tell who was Chinese if they were wearing Louis Vuitton from head to toe, right? Because that was like the mark. And obviously we didn't know whether it was counterfeit or real Louis Vuitton, but that very ostentatious, like wearing all international brands. And then I think after Xi Jinping's kind of like crackdown on like corruption and on like public displays of very large amounts of wealth or whatever you call it, then I think the sentiment also shifted away from like wearing very obvious displays of Western luxury to, I don't know what you call it.
Yeah, I know.
More domestic, affordable luxury goods.
So you see the shift, but the shift is not uniform across the society. Right. Just last night I was talking to a friend who's obviously made some money, and he's saying that, I'm considering buying a Rolls-Royce Cullinan. And I said, well, I mean, it's hard to drive, it's big, and why would you want to do that? And he said, two friends of mine have got it, so it's feel a bit. If I don't get it, I mean, every like billionaire or multi-billionaire drives a Toyota Prius. So you see this as utility rather than a symbol. I do think it's happening in sort of the middle class and the urban sort of educated class, and with the factory owners and stuff. You still see people wearing like a full Louis Vuitton and stuff.
I think the key thing is that I think from my perspective, I think when you look at Europe, for the people who are truly rich, they don't show it because they know that if they show it, they'll get taxed by the government and people will hate on them and then they'll get a backlash and everything. So to me, I think my reflection is that I think in Europe, as a result, the ultra rich are very invisible.
Yeah, right? After like 2 or 3 generations, you don't need to show it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So maybe they'll show it in terms of their experiences. They go on holidays, they have leisure, they're doing art. And then a lot of money is being handled discreetly by their money managers who are investing. I think Jeff Bezos, kind of like booked the whole Venice, right? So, and I was thinking to myself, I don't think any Chinese billionaire would dare to book Venice for, if they book that number of days of Venice, I think Xi Jinping would probably have something to say about that.
Well, it's definitely better to stay low profile.
Yeah.
And then that's not new, right? That's not throughout history. I mean, you see any of those rich businessmen who became like a too sort of extravagant and too exposed is not going to end up well. I mean, you look at the entire like history across dynasties. It happens like that.
What happens is like, I don't know, I was reading some Chinese history books. It's like the richest man in China, then he gets summoned by the emperor.
Yeah, exactly.
And then he gets taxed like 50% or something like that, right?
If you get taxed, that's already a better outcome.
Rather than being... yeah, exactly.
But jokes aside, I think what would be interesting is to see all these Chinese brands who have now sort of kind of beating international brands in China. I mean, I have a bunch of friends who serve international brands in China, and the generally retreat in all the sectors, even in luxury. So people go to like a traditional Chinese like Labubu. No, Labubu. Similar to Labubu. Labubu is a trader of gold. They design their products and stuff. They just opened an outlet in Singapore. So all these people have become domestic competitive. And many of them are trying to be international competitive now. I mean, you see Michu's everywhere. And Lucky now is going to Brazil, and Labubu. I mean, it's crazy.
Yeah, Labubu. So I never understood Labubu, which is this viral, like, frankly, from my perspective, pretty ugly doll.
Either, and I have 3 colleagues in office who buy Labubu regularly, and I've been talking to them. They don't understand. I mean, they couldn't explain why. They said, okay, just the more you stare at it, the more you sort of get drawn with it, the more you want to buy. And
you know what reminds me? You know, it's like the Barbie wave. There used to be a Barbie wave where people buy a lot of Barbies. Wasn't it other? I forgot. There's American wave of doll buying. I can't remember. But I think a lot of it is just socially driven, which is that, you know, it's like if everybody likes Britney Spears, I must like Britney Spears.
Yes.
Therefore, everybody likes Britney Spears. Because if you don't like Britney Spears, you're a weird person. And now it's like, it's almost like Taylor Swift. Everybody listens to Taylor Swift because everybody else is listening to Taylor Swift. So there's a little bit of a, you know, kind of like curve. It's a good example because I think you need a lot of things to get correct, right? You need to do marketing, you need to do the endorsements. I think there's a lot of stuff to learn.
I know a couple of investors in Mart before Mart became big, and there's lots of like narratives and stories. Do think that I mean, Labubu is so they've signed a lot of designers. There are different kind of designs, different doors and stuff. But what they have built is a system behind it that leverages the manufacturing in China, who can produce these things rapidly and at decent cost. And they've signed all the designers, and it's a matter of time or it's a matter of luck that something like Labubu becomes something sensational. But the company has been very profitable for a while. I mean, historically it goes through ups and downs, but they've figured out, I mean, how to manage this. I would think that the key here is the patience of the founder. So now if you look at Labubu has become so sensational, and you see the methods that they are doing, they're doing a lot of things to try to deflate this. Because I mean, it's like the economy, right? And once it can become overheated, it comes crushed down like that's going to cause lots of damage. So a few weeks ago, they restocked some of the popular goods really fast, which basically crashed some of the resellers, hoping to like make a quick profit. So I think it will be interesting to watch as a business model. As for the door itself, I still don't understand.
So I think this is really interesting, right? Because at the end of the day, what you're saying is, if you look at the whole value creation chain, is leveraging the Chinese supply chain. It used to make teddy bears, it makes Barbie dolls, and now it makes Labubu. But the cost is very low.
Someone else has paid that cost to build this supply chain.
Those factories are making lots of different types of dolls and lots of different products. They're not only making Labubus. So, and then the next layer is that this Chinese brand, instead of American brand, has figured out how to make it, create a portfolio of products, design it, iterate on it, and make it go viral.
And also think about that. I mean, Chinese companies or Chinese operation teams, they are much better at doing operations on TikTok, because these are the guys who grew with the growth of Douyin in China. So they know short videos much better than brands in other countries who are trying to figure out how to deal with TikTok.
And I think a lot of brands in America don't want to do TikTok because they keep thinking that TikTok is going to get banned. Because of that, they just don't want to invest into it. They rather invest into YouTube or X or Instagram because they know that it's going to be around.
But when we look at all these Chinese brands throughout their history, short history, right, 10, 15 years, they've always been in this like fast-changing environment through the competition. So they're probably much more nimble because of that, and not because they're inherently like better, but in that aspect. But it's the environment which trained them this way.
Yeah.
And is that long-term sustainable? I don't know. If it's a game of how to adapt in an environment where TikTok dominates people's time, I think these guys have a playbook.
Well, I think the one thing we can all agree on is that in 10 years, the entire world is going to buy more Chinese brands because the marketing will continue to be better, the prices will continue to be good, and so there's going to be that value capture, I think, versus other brands.
I would think so. I think in absence of extreme sort of regulatory action, I don't see any way this will play out otherwise.
Yeah. On that note, thank you so much, and see you next time.
Yeah, see you.
Thank you for listening to Brave. If you enjoyed this episode, please share the podcast with your friends and colleagues. We would also appreciate you leaving a rating or review. Head over to www.bravesea.com for member content, resources, and community. Stay well and stay brave.